Bonjour, everyone. Welcome to Author Talk. And you're with the Alliance Française de Chicago. Today, we're featuring The Hunting Accident, L'accident de chasse, and it's written by David Carlson, illustrated by Landis Blair, and translated into French by Julie Sibony. The book is 2021 winner of the prestigious Fauve D'Or for the best album at the Bande Dessinée Festival d'Angoulême, as well as the 2020 Quai des Boules winner in France. So both in France. The book is widely available in both French and English. Contact me if you have questions. We direct you most principally to your local booksellers if possible. I'm Renee Saito, director of the library at the Alliance. With me today is Charlie Rizzo, along with everyone else, who's a native Chicagoan, who is the son of Matt Rizzo, the subject of the incredible true life story. Here as well is Christina Pringle, intern at the Alliance Library. Before I turn things over to Charlie, here are a few tips on Zoom etiquette for the program. Please put your microphone on mute. Please keep your microphone silent unless you're invited to otherwise. Please communicate with us via the chat line. Where is the chat line? Look at the bottom of your screen where you see some symbols. It's right in the middle and it says chat. Christina will write bonjour. You'll be able to post your questions and comments, and we will reserve some time at the end to discuss them. And now, take it away, Charlie.
Oh, hi. Well, thank you, Renee, and thanks to the Alliance Française for the opportunity to talk about the story, The Hunting Accident. It's a story basically about a father and a son and the redemptive power of literature and how Nathan Leopold, the famous thrill killer of the 20s, immeasurably changed my father's life for the better. The story I told to Dave Carlson, who then turned it into the graphic novel, which is the form it's in now. And I'm happy to present a little bit about the background of my father, just to give you some context. And then Dave and Landis, Dave the writer and Landis the artist, will talk about the process. And then Julie will talk about the translation and how that was accomplished, which was quite amazing. So my father grew up on the west side of Chicago and got into some trouble as a young man. And so when I met my father, my mother passed away at age 10. When I met my father, I always assumed that my father was blinded in a hunting accident. This was everything that I was told growing up. So I didn't think anything was quite unusual about that. Dave will talk more about sort of like how that unfolded and then how the truth was revealed later on. And that's probably the main trope of the story, or one of the tropes. Despite my father's condition as being blind, he became a passionate reader and writer. He wrote reams of poetry and prose, and then basically spent virtually all of his waking hours poring over braille versions of canonical works of the Western canon. And he would be up all night reading and typing and reciting in his little cassette recorder about, his own personal writings. So it was a lifelong project for my father. And when he passed away, I promised him that I would try however I could to get his work published somehow. And so, I don't know, probably 12 years ago, I ran into Dave Carlson at a building that I owned on the west side of the city. And he was there with another friend of his who was a collaborator, a musical collaborator. And Dave told me he was a filmmaker, and I immediately lurched upon David and said, "Hey, David, I've got this interesting project. Do you want to talk about it?" And so we later met for breakfast, and he'll probably share that story with you quickly when he gets on camera. My father wrote his opus was really 10 essays of topics like the atomic bomb and mixed race castaways, and then a short story of personal revelation, which was very similar to Dante's Divine Comedy. I think that's what David really connected to when he began writing the book, and of course he also wrote a screenplay. So that was sort of one of the inspirational moments for him. And then my father's final work was this opus to the writers of the past, which was Homer, Virgil, Shakespeare, Milton, and Dante. All of that work now resides in the Newberry Library, in the archives, which, I feel very proud that that has been put there and then accepted by them. So, things just have been moving along slowly. Dave likes to call it a slow burn with a long tail. And we've been working on this project for a number of years. And there are a number of other associated projects that are happening along with this. So um, I would say that there are some images that Dave will probably show of.
I'm showing them now, Charlie. You can start.
Oh, okay. I just see the hunting accident and accidenta chasse. Okay, here we go. Oh yeah, here's me with my mother, probably in around 19, I don't know, maybe 1953 or 54. I'm in California here. My mother passed away at the age of 10. That's when I ended up, through a custody battle, ended up moving to Chicago with my father, who's in this picture. My father, of course, was blind, hence the sunglasses. And, I was just a young, kind of naive 10-year-old at the time. But it was a great transition for me because it was a very difficult thing losing my mother and then moving in with my father. Even though there was a contentious divorce, my father was very kind to me, and my father and mother never spoke a bad word about one another. So, I was very fortunate in that regard growing up. So then, when I was probably 19, this is probably me at 18, I turned into kind of a troublemaker. I, was previous to that, I was, getting straight A's in school. I was playing the cello in orchestra. I was tap dancing. I had all kinds of cultural aspects to my life working at the same time. And then I found more interest in girls, cars, and gangs. And so at the age of 18, I joined a gang called the JPs, which then later led to my arrest for burglary, in which the trope was revealed to me about my father's loss of his sight. It was when the police came to the door to arrest me, there was a knock. My father answered. They identified themselves. I'm sure my father was in shock. I was in the house. I knew they were out there. He asked the police if he could have a moment with his son, wanted to talk to him about something. He said, yeah, we'll give you 5 minutes. We went into the bedroom. And that's where he revealed how he really lost his eyesight. And that was not in a hunting accident, but was in an armed robbery attempt in Chicago on the northwest side, where him and two of his friends attempted to rob a liquor store. And they were successful, at least in one aspect. And as they were leaving out the back door, I believe it was the back door, they were met by gunshots. His one friend, Joseph, was killed instantly. And my father, as he was entering into the car to escape, was shot with a shotgun in the side of the head, which did not kill him, but obviously blinded him. And he was dropped off at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago, and then later taken to the prison that was next to the police station in Chicago. He was then sentenced to 1 year to life, which is quite an amazing story. Dave will probably talk more about it. And this is a picture of the penitentiary my father ended up in. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave right now. And hopefully I gave you a little insight to the amazing man that my father was. And I think Dave can take you on the journey of the story because it is quite compelling. Dave, thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. So this is some of the research that I did into learning about Stateville Prison. The F house is where Matt Rizzo was in a cell, and the F house was built in a Panopticon design. This was Jeremy Bentham's idea that you could build into the architecture the power structures of a society. And so he designed this Panopticon prison that had a central guard tower. So one guard could see into every cell. And the idea was that the prisoners would have this sense of always being watched, that they were always under surveillance. And this turned out to be very few Panopticon prisons were built. This one in Joliet, Illinois was one of them. Turned out to be a disaster. It was cacophonous. You know, if the guard could see the prisoner, then the prisoners could see the guard, and they knew where he was looking. And so you know, they were able to conduct business and transfer things throughout the cell, avoiding the you know, the guards in the tower. But let's go. You know, this Stateville has housed some very notorious prisoners over the years, and Leopold and Loeb had part of the well, they'd committed what was known as the crime of the century at the time. In 1924, these two young men who were really brilliant young scholars, they were smart, educated, their parents were millionaires, they had a lot of resources, and they had been reading Nietzsche and thought that they could prove that they were the Ubermensch, or the Superman, by committing the perfect crime. So they kidnapped and killed a 14-year-old boy. Really, for the thrill of it was the idea. And this, of course, was such an outrageous crime at the time. It's spawned movies like Compulsion by Orson Welles. Alfred Hitchcock's Rope was inspired by these two young men. And there are numerous books that have been made about the two young men, and they had been in Stateville. They went in 1925. So when Matt Rizzo entered the prison, he entered in 1936. So they'd been there about 10 years. And Matt went in January of 1936 is when they sent him from the local lockup to the big house. And in January, in the first in this week that he was sent there, was also the week that Loeb had been slashed to death in the shower. And so the warden was not sure why Loeb had just been killed. So he pulled Leopold out of the general population and stuck him in what was called the bug cell to keep him safe and under observation. And, you know, it was this sort of twist of fate that Matt Rizzo also entered prison during this week. He was blind. They didn't know what to do with a blind prisoner, so they stuck him in the bug cell. And the two of these young men, 22, well, Leopold was now in his early 30s, probably. They became cellmates. And so Matt Rizzo, and this is really Charlie, from discussions we've had and things that I've learned from Charlie telling me about his father. You know, his father going into prison at 22 years of age. He's newly blind. He's in an 8 by 12 foot cell, and he's with the most heinous criminal in the country at that time. It was literally the boogeyman of Matt Rizzo's childhood was Nathan Leopold. You know, when they committed this crime in 1924, this is when people started, parents started telling their children, don't get into cars with strangers, because they had picked up this, they brought the kid into the car and then drove him out to Wolf Lake and murdered him along the way. This was, and, it was worldwide press. So here Matt Rizzo is now, in the darkest possible place you could imagine a person to be in their life. And so he was suicidal. He thought, okay, my life is over. I've blown it. I've ended, I've got nothing to live for. He went to prison actually because of omerta, which is the mafia code of silence. In the robbery, there were three of them. One guy was killed. One guy got away, and Matt was blinded, and he refused to rat out the guy that got away. And so the judge said, okay, well, if you're not going to cooperate, we're going to send you to prison, and maybe you can learn something there, which of course was not the case in terms of an official way. But unofficially, Nathan Leopold had used, and Loeb as well, when they first got to prison, they built a prison library at Stateville using their family money. And then Leopold began to teach classes. So here he is teaching Greek to prisoners at Stateville. And he really spent his entire 33 years at Stateville studying languages. He was a polyglot. There's different estimates, anywhere between 13 and 20 languages that he mastered during his time there. Obviously, in prison, you have a lot of time on your hands. And so he used it to study languages, among other things. The Chicago History Museum has Leopold's entire personal archives. And so in my research, I went and, put the white gloves on and was able to go through his artifacts. He has journals where he's, studying Sanskrit, and he's comparing Russian to English, or he's, doing these just notebooks filled with his thoughts about language. And then the Deering Library at Northwestern University has the entire legal transcript from the trial of Leopold and Loeb, which is, at Northwestern, it's known as the murder that would not die, because every time they do an exhibition of the archive of the legal transcripts and things like that, they just have lots of people showing up. It's sort of an enduring story, at least here in Chicago. And so I was also able to go through then all of the legal transcript of the trial, which was conducted by Clarence Darrow, the famous attorney who had also been gained some notoriety around the Scopes trial. Darrow was really a champion of the underdog, but he took this case on because he wanted to take on the death penalty. The cry at the time was that they would hang the boys. And he made a plea. He took the case on and took it on pro bono in order to make a case as to why, and it really actually moved the needle in this country away from capital punishment because of the argument that he made to spare the boys' lives. So when they got to prison, Leopold, again, like I said, started to study and learn. And so here he is, he's got this cellmate, Matt Rizzo, who is suicidal. So what does Leopold do? He teaches himself to read braille. And he then decides to, so that he can teach Matt how to read braille. And then he immerses him in a classical education. And so Matt spends the next 4 years, really the rest of his life, studying the works of these, the great poets of Western civilization. And so this story was one that when Charlie first told me at a breakfast one day, I was just so amazed that, that this this very dark place that a person that Matt was in, his father was in, the darkest possible place. And in the middle of that, there's this little tiny pinpoint of light that's coming. And the light that's coming to him is from, this really heinous child murderer, Nathan Leopold. And I just, I just couldn't wrap my head around that story. But I did eventually, after about, 6 months of talking with Charlie, and then I spent a year or year and a half, maybe, working on a screenplay. And when I finished the screenplay, I thought, oh, well, I should do it as a graphic novel. I also have plans to do it as a stage play, and this would be the film, to do a transmedia rollout of a intellectual property these days. There's so many different platforms that you can tell your story on. So I wanted to, express it in as many ways as possible. And so this, I thought, well, let's do a graphic novel. And I'd never read a graphic novel before I started this project, but I thought, oh, I need to meet an illustrator. And I went to a comic convention here in Chicago, and I had my screenplay. And I thought, okay, I've done some commercial directing work in my career, and TV commercials and things like that. And so I'd worked with storyboards before, and I thought a graphic novel will be a storyboard for the movie. So I wrote a screenplay. And then I found Landis Blair at Wizard World in Chicago. This would have been, I think, 2012. And, Charlie and I first started talking in the 2009, 2010 arena, somewhere in there. So by 2012, I was ready to do this graphic novel. I found Landis, saw his work, I was going up and down the aisles at Artist Alley, and there was all of these superhero kind of guys, and I was like, this isn't what I'm looking for. And then when I saw Landis and the cross-hatching he was doing, I picked up his card from his desk and I followed up with him, and we ended up working on the project. So let me bring in also at this time, Landis Blair, who took my screenplay. And Landis, maybe you want to talk about what your process was here.
Okay. Yes. So Dave gave me the screenplay, and I spent about two months creating thumbnails of kind of reading through and trying to figure out my idea of the pacing, or the rough idea of the layouts and the kind of visually how this would appear on the page. And Dave specifically wanted me to do this on my own, apart from him, because he wanted me to, the screenplay he gave me was his overall vision for the story. Then he wanted me to kind of that vision to then to go through me and see what came out. And so I spent a couple of months doing all of these thumbnails for the entire book. And while the thumbnails they might seem kind of rough, what's interesting about this is that a number of these pages, they translated almost exactly to the final pages. I mean, it wasn't, of course, modifications were made, but this stage of the process, at least for me, was by far the most creative part, because when you're just doing these little thumbnails, anything can go. And so when I was reading Dave's script, I was kind of able to almost play with the story visually. And so I'd try things and then kind of throw them out and try different thumbnails until I was happy with something. And because of that, a lot of that initial creativity maintained through the rest of the story, that at least visually, for their entire rest of the process, which is, another almost 3 years, was in many cases just refining these visual ideas. I mean, of course, then with layering the story, which was the next stage of this process. But so at least for me, the thumbnails were a crucial part for me, at least I mean, Dave had said he had never read a graphic novel. I'd never drawn one before. This was the first time I'd done comics. And so I was kind of just trying to figure it out from what I thought made sense to me. So once I had done those thumbnails, Dave and I then enlarged all of these thumbnails to the size of the page that we were going to actually print them. I mean, in the final book. And then Dave layered the dialogue over it, and we put them on these storyboards that all around our studio. And we spent then the next 3 months every day just walking through the story over and over again, refining it and realizing, okay, well, this section seemed out of place, we should rearrange it, or we need to add more space here, or you can see the post-it notes there. We were identifying different themes throughout the story. And so then even just at a glance, you could see, oh, these pink notes represent this theme, and it's been quite a while since we've included that. And so it was a very interactive process, but it also was by far the most collaborative time of the project. And what I think back fondly at this time with working with Dave, and this is when I was just getting to know him, but I felt like it was almost like our brains were merging into one, because I can't keep straight what things Dave suggested that I changed visually and which things I came up on my own. And this same with the text, because we were completely enmeshed in this, and we're letting the story start to tell itself. So I'm not sure what we got. So after we had done this, spent those few months doing the kind of getting the story right, then I started working on the final pages. And so this time-lapse video here is me inking an entire page. So I've already penciled this page out, but the way that I work is, I mean, I have friends that tease me, that tell me that they're also illustrators, and they tease me saying that I make coloring book pages for myself because I just kind of make outlines and then I go through and I fill it in. But at least for me, this is the way that I've always worked with my illustrations. And it's once I have the outlines, then I feel comfortable just kind of letting myself get lost in the cross-hatching. And while the cross-hatching takes a great deal of time, and there's definitely faster ways to do it, for me, well, I guess for the story, from that perspective, it seemed to line up well with the time period of the story, because the cross-hatching has a slightly vintage feel to it. I mean, it evokes old prints, but it also brings kind of almost a dirty or kind of falling apart. You kind of like you can see the cracks in the walls, or I mean, the lines themselves become cracks. But cross-hatching essentially is, as you can see with this time lapse, is building up different tones and values with hundreds and hundreds of little marks in different directions. So you're able to delineate textures and in different objects. But the main, two of the reasons that I enjoy it so much, one is that I feel like because there's so many little lines, you are able to correct things because each line in and of itself is fairly insignificant. And so if you see something going wrong, you have time to correct it by the next time you're going over with a pass, a different hatching. But then on a more personal note, I find the cross hatching makes me more comfortable showing the drawings to people because I feel very insecure about my drawings and don't have a hard time seeing the value in them. And so the cross hatching, what I like about it is that even if people can see that the drawing isn't necessarily that good, at least they can look at it and they can see how much time I spent on it, and hopefully then they'll they at least can respect that aspect of it. So it's I suppose it's an outlet for my insecurity, but and then
and speaking of time, Lance, let me just say, this was 3 years. Full time, 6 days a week. This is what he did. I would come into the studio in the morning. He'd already be there. I'd leave at the end of the day. He'd still be there. So this was, really quite a labor intensive project.
It definitely was. Well, and Dave, when he hired me, or when he first brought me in on the project, he said that he thought this would be about 200 pages and it would take 6 months. And so the ending, I think it's 450 pages, and it took us 3 years working together. So it definitely didn't it went differently than our expectations. But I'm so grateful for the entire process, for the time I got to spend with Dave, as well as just allowing ourselves to be so kind of fully in the world of this of Matt and Charlie's incredible story. It really was a special time. So
yeah, and one thing we would do too, I'll just to add, is that I would bring in at times like a quote from Emerson that I'd been reading, like say from The Poet, and it's actually, there's a panel that's dedicated to that in the in the graphic novel. But I would say, Landis, listen to this. This is what Emerson's saying about the poet. And then I'd read it. And then we'd spend the next hour or two talking about the ideas that were present in the works that Matt was writing about in his own personal writings. And I think that this really, it just infected the work that we were doing. And by the end of the book, by the time we got to the end of the process, the story was telling us what to do. We had really gotten it was a monumental effort. And so let's move on from here to we got a French edition, and we ended up going to France and doing a book tour back in October. The French readers were just incredible. This was a year after the book had come out, and we went to a dozen different cities. We met with tons of readers that were very enthusiastic about the story and the ideas that were embedded in the story. It was just such a joy to be able to talk with them about their what interested them about the book. Every event we did was sold out because of limited space due to COVID issues. But here, this is in Belgium, where there's people lining up to get their book signed before we got there. And we just had a really amazing time. We did some radio shows, and this is Oxane, who was our brilliant translator on the left here, who was with us throughout the journey. So let's go from here to Julie. I'll stop sharing my screen. Julie, if you want to take over and talk about translation, that was one of the really fascinating things that I was discovering through the process of the book tour and meeting Julie and this thing. So Julie, take it away.
Yes, hi. I'm trying to go slideshow. Yeah. So I'm the translator of that book. I'm speaking to you tonight from Jerusalem because I happen to be living here. So we're going international. And this is why it's nighttime here. It's like almost, it's 7:30 in the evening. I just want to say what an adventure it was. You already got an idea from what, well, first of all, the real story of Charlie and Matt is pretty amazing. And then the whole story of the making of the book. And I have to say, it's kind of the beginner's luck, because it was, as David mentioned, it was the first time he was writing graphic novel. It was the first time that Landis was drawing a graphic novel. And it was actually also for me the first time I was translating a graphic novel. I usually translate novels from English to French. And I work with this publishing house in France who decided to publish this. And it was actually their first time also, because they usually publish thrillers. But they fell in love with the book and they decided to become a graphic novel publishing house for the first time. So everyone was like a beginner, sort of, in this adventure. And it's pretty amazing the success that the book got in France. As you understood, it received what we call the Fauve D'Or, which is like the Palme d'Or. It's really for comic books. It's the most important prize in the most important comic book festival in France. And it got several other prizes, by the way. So we were, I mean, I'm so grateful that I was on board for this project. I want to talk very briefly about a few specificities when you translate a graphic that I had to learn on the field, because as I said, it was my first time translating a graphic novel. The first issue, the main issue actually, is the size that the text takes on the page, because French is, no matter what you do, French is going to always to be longer than English. When you translate a novel, it usually ends up being 15 to 20% longer in French than in English, which is fine when you translate a novel, because you can just add pages, you know. But in this case, you have the text has to fit in the text box. So the main difficulty that I had was to keep it short. You know, if I had several solutions, several ideas, several choices to translate a sentence, I always had to pick the shortest one. So this was the main challenge. And I'll show you, for instance, sometimes it didn't quite work. So for instance, here you see on the left, you see the English version, and on the right, the French version. And as you can see, we had to extend the text box to make it fit. In this case, which we tried to do really as rarely as possible, because we really wanted to respect the integrity of the image. You know, when you realize how much work Landis put in every little hatch, you don't want to mess with that. So this is one example, one of the very few examples when we had to change the size of the text box so that the text could fit. But in general, I tried to respect the size of the text box and just managed to make it fit in French. Another thing that is really important in this book is sounds. Because the main character is blind, his perception of the world comes through sounds. So there's really a lot of onomatopoeia, and it could seem really easy to translate, but actually you also have to translate onomatopoeia. And I'm showing you here a page, just as before. You have the English version on the left and the French version on the right. And as you can see, some of the onomatopoeia just stayed the same, like clank, for instance, or slam, because it works in French. Some others we had to adapt a little. For instance, if you notice carefully, the buzz in English becomes buzz. Buzz is an English word. We don't use that in French. The ring becomes dring, because dring is the sound of a telephone in French. And some of them would completely have to change, because I noticed that, I didn't know that a lot of time in English, you just use the verb. For instance, here for the dog, you have whine, and it's just the verb of his sound. We cannot do this in French. So I had to translate the verb into a French sound. So I decided that the dog would say "aou," which is kind of a whine for a dog. But as you can see, it's like really small details, like just also flush is a verb in English, and I made it into a sound. It became splash in French. So this is just a few examples. I want to show you still another example of onomatopoeia. Here you can see as well that, for instance, squeak is a verb that you have to translate. It becomes quick. It's a sound in French. Or drip, drip, drip becomes pluck, pluck, pluck. The brush, stroke, stroke becomes psh, psh, which is the sound that I came with. These are a few other examples. As you may know, well, knock, knock in French we say toc, toc, toc. And this is becoming a bit more tricky, because in those examples, the words are really integrated into the image. So it's not only a question of finding a translation, but then you also have to change the image itself. And this is where another person intervenes. Her name is Jeanne Mitrel, and she was our graphic designer on that book. And I really want to mention her name because her work was amazing. And as you can see, she tried as much as possible to respect the image. But of course, sometimes, for instance, here, you know, the tire, the screech becomes, it's just another way of writing it. It's just more French. That it's not Landis writing anymore, you know, she had to do it, I guess, with a computer. So we're losing a little, but it's always the case when you translate. You always lose something, but we tried to be as faithful as we could. It gets more tricky even here, because as you can see, the word snitch, it's really part of the image. And in this case, she managed to do an awesome job. And she tried, you know, to imitate as much as possible Landis' style. And we translated into balance, which is the equivalent of snitch in French. So you could almost think that it's original. I mean, you don't really here you don't really see the difference.
Excuse me, Julie, is your screen frozen? Does anybody else see? On my screen seems to be frozen. Is that just me? On the tire screech page.
I changed it. You don't see it?
Is someone else seeing? Okay, there we go. Now it's happening. Yeah, I just got it now. Okay, sorry.
Okay, could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is another example of the text. We couldn't manage quite to, as in the English version on the left, the letter I of him is the little character, which is the father of Leopold. We didn't quite manage to keep that in French, but we tried to get as near as possible to the original. This is also a page that gave us a lot of work, because as you can see, it's newspaper pages, and we had to translate every single one of them. And it was really tricky because also the text is hidden in some parts, you know. So, and it's not very readable. So I had to kind of
I think it's frozen now, David.
You don't hear me anymore?
You went silent for a moment, but we hear you now.
I'm sorry. Okay. So I'm showing you, can you see the newspaper pages?
No, not yet. We're still on the graphic with balance and snitch.
Oh, it's too bad. I don't know what's going on.
Ah, there we go. Okay.
I loved him.
Can you see?
Yeah,
You are
good
on I
now.
Loved It?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is another example of where the text into the image itself. And we couldn't, do you hear me,
Yes.
David?
Yeah,
Yes.
you're cutting in and out though, Julie. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe I should change my connection, but
Well, let's keep moving forward. We have
okay.
about 15
So,
minutes left, so.
yeah. So this is another example. I love them, where in the English version, the character, the little character is the letter I of the word. We couldn't quite keep that in French, but we tried to do something similar, you know. It's sometimes you lose, you cannot win all the time. The next example is this page.
Okay, I think you're frozen again, Julie, but the image is up. Now we see you. Now, yeah.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I don't know, it's my connection. So I was saying this page gives us also a lot of work because we had to translate every single newspaper clip, parts that were hidden because the text in English is not fully written. I had to kind of make it up and, you know, guess what was there in English to reconstruct the page in French.
Okay.
And this, can you see the double page now with liar, liar,
Yes,
liar, liar
yes,
in the background? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is, I wanted to show you this because this is an example where you just call it quits. You cannot I mean, we were not going to, you know, replace every single liar on the page. So we just kept the page as it was. And in the bottom left corner, as you can see, there's a little footnote saying that
Julie,
liar yeah.
excuse me. I think you need to go to the next image. I believe we're on the double image of the translation of the two, but I think the next image you have is more of a close-up of one of these.
No, we're still stuck on the newspaper one, I think. And then we're not seeing the liar, liar, liar page.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
do you see it now, the liar?
No, you backed up the other way. Go the other way.
not yet.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It's gonna come up.
If we keep on having problem, I would suggest we go to Q&A. Just it's too bad for the bad connection.
Oh. Okay.
Can you
yeah,
okay.
It's we're still kind of stuck on this, but I think the suggestion for me is to just go ahead and start some Q&A. Okay. Here's another image of the it looks like the Panopticon Tower. And do you want to talk about this, Julie?
We have about 10 minutes left for questions too. So
Okay. All right.
Okay, I want to another
wrap it up,
connection.
Julie.
I want to another connection. Maybe it's better.
Well, Christina is actually showing us this
Okay, cool,
now.
very
So
cool.
I think she can walk you through the rest of it.
Okay, so that's it. This is the page I was talking about where we just couldn't you know, translate all the words. I mean, all the little liars. So we just put a footnote on the bottom left corner. And yeah, this is a case where we just kept the page in English. But then if we don't have so much time, I think we can move to Q&A if you want. I just wanted to talk very briefly about one other problem was that there's, as you mentioned, there are a lot of quotes from writers, from authors in this book, mostly Dante, but also, as you mentioned, you know, Emerson, Keats, Carlsberg. And so there was a lot of research to be done because you don't just wake up a morning and decide to translate Dante, you know. So this is those are one of the few French versions of Dante that I used, but I used more. I used at least 6 different translations to make sure that I could find what I needed. Because sometimes the English version that David was using was not exactly the same that what I was finding in the French version. So it was really tricky. There was also a really tricky part, and it made me work a lot on Dante, which was a blessing.
Yeah.
So we can keep it here. This is an example, but it's too we don't have time, so let's keep it.
Okay, who's going to read the questions?
Right. Well,
Renee?
we do have a question in the chat line now from Aaron. He's asking, why is French 20% longer than English, and how does that compare with other languages?
It's just the way French is. I mean, the words are longer in themselves. In English, you have a lot of monosyllabus words. We don't have that in French. I mean, we have few. The words are longer. The structure of the sentences is longer. So it's always like this. And how does it compare with other languages? I don't know about all the languages, but I know, for instance, Italian is even longer. So there is translators know what we call the expansion coefficient. We use this word. So we know when you know it for the languages that you work with. I know that from English to French it's plus 15 to 20.
Thank you for that response, Julie. We have someone who's asking, what is David and Landis's next project?
Well, we don't know yet. We're talking about it. That's a big question. Landis is working on his own. He's got a children's book coming out. That's his second or now his third book published. And I'm working on a Broadway musical version of The Hunting Accident. I just finished the book and lyrics during the pandemic, and so we have a composer who's working on the music right now. But we will do something. We will have a follow-up because we had such a great time with this one. So
Yeah.
Someone is asking, will the book be translated into any other languages?
Yeah, it's we have publishing deals coming out. It just came out in Catalan in December. Spanish in January came out, and then later this year we'll see Portuguese, Chinese, German, and Italian editions. And they're working on Scandinavia as well, some other markets. Yeah.
Someone is writing, wow. And that was going to be my response. Like, wow, what can you say to that? That's just, well, in a way, it's not surprising at all. It's just amazing. Thank you. And then Gabby is asking, what was the best part about this project? Open question.
Well, I think the best part is, well, I have 2 answers to that. I'm not sure what Dave would say. The first answer I was going to say would be what's happening right now. What we're just talking about with the that the work is done at this point, but seeing that, at least for myself, I know Dave's been more involved with extensions of this project and different variations, but for myself, I've been working on a number of other projects, and so my head is in a very, very different place from, I finished working on this now over 5 years ago, And so it's very interesting and gratifying, like seeing it come back and seeing more and more people engage with it. It's kind of it's a bit baffling, but it's extremely it makes me both grateful, but it's also exciting to see that this story that I had, you know, some small part in or was engaged with is just growing, and that more and more people are finding out about it. But the second answer I'd have is probably the more genuine one, is that it was just it was so great to have such a focused project that's all I was doing and working with Dave, and that's a luxury I don't think I'm going to ever have, or I mean, ever replicate in the exact same way again. So I will always be grateful to both Dave and Charlie.
Yeah, same for me. That period of time where we really became very close friends and diving into the work, you know, I think for me also, I was just a place in my own journey where I really needed to hear the voice of the poet in my own life. And so it all sort of came together in this story, which was great.
Oh. Did we lose Renee?
We have a busy library here. We're in demand.
Oh.
So someone's asking a practical question. If it took 3 years, how could you afford to pay your expenses? Well, it's a good question, but I'm sure you
I
may-
raised some money to pay Landis's just basic needs to get him through the time. I like this next question here about why is it so appealing to French readers in France? This was a huge surprise to me that we did not. I mean, we got good press on the release of the English edition. We were in the New York Times book review of books in their holiday guide for best picks of the year. We got great articles in GQ and just a lot of different, we won awards, but I think that in what became apparent to me from the book tour was that French readers, they don't view graphic novels as comics. They see it as literature, and they embrace it in a very different way. They're much more sophisticated about the kinds of graphic novels that they read. There's a ton more graphic novels. I mean, you know, I think this also has to do with the fact that independent bookstores thrive in France because of the, I think it's called the Lang Law, that once a publisher sets a price, it can't be undercut by Amazon or discount sellers. And so this has allowed the French readers to have access to, you know, a more curated, not just big box stores, but a lot more curated, intimate stories. And also the French readers, to me, like when we would talk to them, they wanted to talk about the ideas that were present in the story, the poets and the things that these poets were, that Emerson and Dante were expressing. You know, that was that was their sort of what they were passionate about. And you know, and I think to some degree there's a you know, a strain of anti-intellectualism that has accompanied the release of our book in 2017. That was also sort of there was a rise of anti-intellectualism in this country, and so that certainly doesn't help our particular story.
Thanks, David. Charlie, I wanted to ask you an important question before we wrap up here, which is, what would you like us, what's the message behind the story and your dad's life story? What would you like us to take away from this experience in this book?
Well, I think the ideas that are embedded in the book are what my father really, I think Dave did a really great job of sort of articulating his passion and his obsession with his writing, which again, I said, now lives in the Newberry Library in the archives. But one thing I did want to mention, and I'll be finished, I've been in contact with Leopold's niece, and we have met as in person, and you know, she told me how much her life was affected by what her uncle had done in the whole family, and she held a lot of pain from that episode. That's how epic that was in our culture and certainly in her family's life. I'm happy to say that I think Dave did a wonderful job in the redemption of Leopold in spite of the heinous crime. For me, I wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for Leopold. Dave wouldn't be writing this book, and this story wouldn't be living again today without Nathan Leopold's support. So, you know, I can't say enough about how much I feel, you know, he was such an important factor in this story. And Dave did a great job in you know, sharing that throughout the story. That's about all I have to say. Thank you all for listening to us for an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Dave, Landis, Charlie, Julie, Christina. Thank you everyone for attending. And I wanted to throw in a quick pitch, which is our classes are starting on April 18th here, the French classes, and we have an open house for kids on Saturday for those who are interested. But welcome to everyone. I mean, thank you and goodbye to everyone. And see you soon. Thank you.
Au revoir. Merci beaucoup.